When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, Woman, you are set free from your ailment. Then he laid his hand on her, and immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant that Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites! Does not each of you on the Sabbath day untie your ox and your donkey from the manger and lead it away to give it water? And ought this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 years long, be set free from this bondage on the Sabbath day?" When he said this, all his opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things that Jesus was doing. Imagine that you are bent over as much as the women are in our story. In fact, I want you to try it. I would like those who are able to stand up, all right, and then bend over, all right? It's kind of a different position, and if you want to see people, you have to crane your neck to do so, right? And that can get kind of tiring, I imagine. And now I want you to try and move either down your pew or out into an aisle while you stay bent over. It's not the easiest thing to do, is it? And you're, again, either looking up, or if your neck gets tired, you have to look down. And what do you see when you look down but a bunch of feet and sandals that perhaps you're following? All right, if you're tired of that, stand up, and you may be seated. In our scripture today, Luke tells us that the bent-over woman wasn't able to stand up when her back grew tired. For 18 years, she had lived in a body that was bent over, and she was unable to stand up. I imagine that she had grown accustomed to it in some ways, finding her way by watching the feet of others, trying to avoid the dirty, dusty, sandaled feet that were everywhere, speaking with the other women at the well without ever making eye contact, sitting in the sanctity of her home only to find that the seat offered her little comfort for the crippled contours of her body. She probably expected little more from her life, but as always, she went to the synagogue to observe the Sabbath as she had been taught. She had started to work her way to a seat, hoping to hear at least some of what this Jesus, whom she had heard of, was speaking. She had grown used to the disdain that emanated from those around her, who turned quickly away from her as she passed by. As a woman, she was already considered no more than property, and in her condition, she was damaged goods. It didn't help that the teaching of the law at that time suggested that she was to blame for the awkward turns her body made. She believed, as most did, that God punishes those who sin. Therefore, since she was crippled, she must have committed some terrible sin. But she couldn't imagine what that sin could have been, a sin that would be so terrible to result in 18 years of crippling pain. And 18 years of fervent prayer had brought her no closer to an answer. Until that day in the synagogue. She was on her way to a seat when the room grew strangely quiet, and she was the only one moving. She turned around where she was to find that the man who was teaching in front, this Jesus, was looking directly at her. Looking at her. There was none of the disdain in his eyes she had seen among the others. Rather, his eyes gently coaxed her forward and called to her until she found herself standing directly in front of him. She couldn't hold her head up any longer. Her head dropped and she looked down at the floor as was her custom, but that didn't stop Jesus. "Woman, you are set free." And before she had a chance to ask him what he meant, before anyone had a chance to ask him what he meant, he placed his hands on her. He touched her. And she felt an incredible surge electrify her body, and there she was, standing straight up. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She was standing straight up and looking directly into the eyes of the wonder man who had healed her. This man, she had heard, had been sent by God. And before she could stop to think, she danced and sang praises to her God, the God of Abraham and Sarah, the God who sent Jesus to her. Her zeal, however, was not shared by the leaders of the synagogue. After all, this was the Sabbath, and the Holy Scripture required that the Sabbath be kept, that no work be done. And there was the Mishnah and other interpretations that described exactly what was work and what was not work. So the synagogue leader tried to convince the crowd of this, a crowd that has already broken ranks and had begun to join this woman in praising God. No, there are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come and be healed then, not on the Sabbath day. And you can almost see him trying to shoo the people back into their places to restore order to the day. But before he can regain control, Jesus rises. "You hypocrites! You loose your ox on the Sabbath day so it can go for water. And yet when I loose the chains that Satan has laid on this daughter of Abraham, you complain that I'm breaking the Sabbath?" And when put in such a light, the leaders gave no response. But the crowds did. They rejoiced. They rejoiced because Jesus made clear that day that even ordinary people, even outcasts, mattered. Because this story isn't just about healing, and it isn't simply about reclaiming the real meaning of the Sabbath, although recognizing and attending to human need is a very important part of Sabbath to Jesus. No, this story is about the incredible way Jesus interacted with one of the most marginalized people of his day, a woman, and how he interacted and the freedom that is implied by those actions. First, Jesus actually sees the woman and her pain. Secondly, he speaks to her. For a man to speak or touch a woman to whom he is not related was taboo. So in saying she is set free and in touching her, Jesus not only frees her from her broken body, but from the societal bondage that came with being female. Thirdly, when the synagogue ruler begins to criticize this woman's healing, Jesus advocates not only for his own actions, but for the woman as well. He calls her daughter of Abraham, a term unique to this story. And while men were sometimes referred to as sons of Abraham, to identify a woman as related to Abraham was to change her status. The term daughter of Abraham not only recognized the woman as a human being rather than property, but as a child of God. And the crowd recognized this as good news. Unlike many situations Jesus found himself in, here the entire crowd rejoiced because Jesus stood up for a woman and freed her from bondage, both physically and metaphorically. There is a Ken Medema song called Eye to Eye, which depicts this story in song. And I'm going to sing that song for you in a moment. But I want you to listen to the call Ken takes away from that story. One of them is, so sisters down the centuries, it's time to know you've been pressed down too long. And all who claim to follow Christ must call down power to end this ancient wrong. I wish Ken's words were not so relevant in this current climate. We are in a time where women once again are being pressed down simply for being women. Women are being deprived of their rights, the freedom to make choices about their own bodies, to make choices about health care. Women continue to make less money than men, and the list goes on. Women are twice as likely as men to experience sexual harassment at work. Women and girls experience more sexual violence than males. More women and girls are killed by people they know. Jobs where women predominate, such as teachers, caregivers, daycare providers, are undervalued and underpaid. Healthcare professionals take women less seriously when they complain of pain. And Black women face even more discrimination when seeking health care, among other things. And don't even get me started on the amount of discrimination and violence faced by those who are gender nonconforming or trans. If you identify as female, you have likely experienced some of the above. And while it is sometimes difficult for me to know what to do after centuries of women before me having tried and are trying to remedy these injustices, what is clear, what Jesus makes clear, is that we are all worthy of basic human dignity, including women, including the infirm, including those who, like the bent-over woman, remained unnamed. And it is those who say we follow Jesus that must stand up to those who suggest otherwise, to those who would continue to dehumanize women or make them something less than men. We are called to right the injustices that are waged against women, against differently abled, against children, against LGBTQ. We are called to dismantle the unjust structural barriers that continue to press down the most vulnerable. As Ruth Bader Ginsburg once said, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have continued to side with the oppressors. So don't side with the oppressors. Do as Jesus did and side with God. Excitement filled the atmosphere. Sorry. My bad. Excitement filled the atmosphere. I can't get past that personally, Mary. I'm sorry. Sorry. It's just get my brain in the song here. All right. Excitement filled the atmosphere, for everyone had come to hear a carpenter turned preacher boy from Galilee. And as we rushed to find our place, I saw the look on someone's face. When would it ever stop this way? They looked at me. See how she is, they will kindly say. How did she come to be that way? Isn't it a shame, and isn't it a pity? She'll never stand tall, and she'll never look pretty. She's all bent over, she's all bent over, she's all bent over, and she can't stand straight. For 18 years I'd heard these things. Time does not erase the sting, and every day I'd further down. I'd gone beyond all fantasy, all hoping for recovery, and now I knew that I would be forever bound. See how she is, they will kindly say. How did she come to be that way? Isn't it a shame, and isn't it a pity? She'll never stand tall, and she'll never look pretty. She's all bent over, she's all bent over, and she can't stand straight. Then all at once I froze in fear, for the Galilean said, "Come here," and every eye was on me, and I wished to die. "Stand up," then he said to me, and then he placed his hand on me, and all at once I stood to face him eye to eye. Can this be so? Can I believe I'm standing tall? Do my eyes deceive? It's been 18 years. How strange I feel. I'm standing tall. This must be real. Right there in that synagogue, I praised the God who brought me up again. I thanked him for this wonder man who came to me and took away my pain. The God we serve is mighty to destroy the power of death, the strength of hate, to make the crooked straight. Well, naturally, this little scene disturbs the Sabbath-born routine. The synagogue's officialdom was quite distressed, and in a voice both harsh and loud, the ruling elder stilled the crowd and tried to hide his anger, seeming unimpressed. Hear ye! Now this is the synagogue, in case you have forgotten it. Why do you behave in this frightfully disgusting way? This is the Sabbath day, in case you have forgotten it. See how the crowd pleaser works on the holy day. This is a synagogue, in case you have forgotten it. Why do you behave in this frightfully disgusting way? See how the crowd pleaser works on the holy day. They were bent out of shape, bent out of shape, bent out of shape when I stood up straight. My songs of praises turned to fear, for some began to boo and jeer, and others followed up this leader's angry words. And Jesus stood to make reply. The fire was flashing in his eyes, and when he spoke, the faintest breathing could be heard. Hypocrites! Your rocks on the Sabbath day and let it go for water. Yet you complain when I take away the chains Satan has laid on this daughter of Abraham. And the amens came, they came from all around, and the angry red-faced rulers of the synagogue were put down, and the blind and the lame who had lost all hope, and the women and the children who had lost all hope, rose like a mighty army to cheer. For God had given hope. Yes, God had given hope. God had given hope that Sabbath day. So, sisters down the centuries, it's time to know you've been pressed down too long. And all who claim to follow Christ must call down power to end this ancient wrong. For God we serve is mighty to destroy the power of death, the strength of hate, to make the crooked straight, to make the crooked straight. And week by week the Lord's day comes. We come to church with expectations small. We crave routine, we fall asleep, and Jesus comes to stand the broken tall. The God we serve is mighty to destroy the power of death, the strength of hate, to make the crooked straight, to make the crooked straight.